Bin Laden existed in Afghanistan exactly 17 years before our government existed. We inherited him. And the fact is that such people were instigated by the CIA and by the government of America in that time to go and fight the Soviets. And such people were called the heroes of independence. And all of a sudden, they have changed now to terrorists. We don't say that we are defending terrorism, but we need to know whether they are really terrorists or not. So we don't know as to what to do now. We have been given no counter proposals. And now the perception in Afghanistan is that maybe the United States is always looking for a boogeyman. Because so many people have their jobs following Bin Laden now. If Bin Laden is not there, they will lose jobs.
So it's very embarrassing for us to sit here and listen to a criminal speak and ask him questions, because as you see, every single word that comes out of his mouth is locked.
So what's interesting is that conservatives were always pissed at him because they were like, you're spending too much time hunting that Bin Laden fella. And so he like authorized boots on the ground into Afghanistan, and the CIA and FBI were like, no, he wanted to send special forces in.
Yeah.
No one knew Al-Qaeda existed then. And
but did they know in 1996 when he declared war on the U.S.? Did they know in 1998
Absolutely.
when he bombed the two embassies? Did they know in 2000 when he hit the pole?
What did I do? I worked hard to try to kill him. I authorized the finding for the CIA to kill him. We contracted with people to kill him. I got closer to killing him than anybody's gotten since.
Which should have happened, honestly. Like, to prevent 9/11, like, the full-scale invasion was such a bad idea.
Oh, of course it was.
Well, of course, the U.S. did not occupy Afghanistan right away in the way they expected. They did something much more beneficial to the jihadist cause. They occupied Iraq, and they provided day after day, month after month, telegenic images of American troops abusing Muslims. This was exactly what Al-Qaeda wanted to create. I mean, if you look at the images from Abu Ghraib, they might as well be recruitment posters made on Madison Avenue for the jihadi cause. I think that the United States, if it has learned anything, it should have learned to stop acting against its own best interests.
What point is there to send not only the US military, but drag allies into the Middle East for your own petty conflict? Like, there's no, and this is the thing that really gets me about this whole thing, because the US dragging themselves in there is one thing, but you also drag countries, you basically coerce them into following you into these countries, because you're like, well, we're the ones protecting you. You come with us or you lose your protection. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's how mafia works.
It's exactly right. So
that's
it's
how
just,
feudalism worked, you know?
So it's just very, the whole thing was a bad idea. And I love that people are just, they're coming out now. They're like, oh, I was always against it.
That's not true.
They always have videos coming out like, you were always against it? Then what's this? Posts 7 different videos of them saying this is a good idea, we should be in Afghanistan.
I mean, when something like that happens to the degree that it did, there's definitely an invasion coming, but it's like there's so much hindsight, and people look at it in a hindsight situation where it's like, it's the same thing where they think that they would have been on the good side of civil rights. except they were there. They were there and think they were on the good side. This one. It's so dumb.
Well, Biden's the perfect example of that, isn't he? He was pro-segregation, was he not? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was something like that. It was something to do with they didn't want. He didn't want kids to ride the same bus as his kids. He specifically said that it would be a racial jungle.
Yes, that's right. I remember that. Yeah. Okay, so do you want to talk about post 9/11 Bin Laden and that whole shit show?
We had dialogues open with Omar. I don't think Omar is that big of a villain. He's not a very villainous figure, the founder of the Taliban.
There was a tremendous stir in Kandahar. We followed the crowds to a mosque in the city center. The Taliban had been holding an assembly of mullahs from all over Afghanistan. Now the results were about to be made public. A holy war was announced against the government of President Rabbani in Kabul. And the head of the Taliban, Mullah Omar, was declared to be the Ameer, or leader of all Muslims everywhere. Because this was regarded as a key moment for the Afghan nation, Mullah Omar displayed the holy cloak of the Prophet Muhammad to the crowd. It's kept in Kandahar and is shown only at times of crisis. The last time was 60 years ago. Neither the cloak nor the ceremony has ever been filmed before, nor has Mullah Omar. People in the crowd threw up their turbans to touch the cloak and be blessed by it. It was like being at some great religious ceremony in the Middle Ages.
I mean, like, these guys were, you know, they were generals of, you know, paramilitaries. Like, of course, brutal shit happened. It's war, you know. But if you look at what the Soviets did to people, there's this war crime that I was looking at the other day. I don't remember exactly when it happened, but it was one of the opening ones where a bunch of people, they were refugees who were they were displaced, and they were hiding in the sewer. And the Soviets went in and poured diesel into the fucking sewer and lit it on fire. And it was like all just like kids and shit, just burnt them. And they like fell into the sludge at the bottom of the sewer. So it was like they were be able to preserve to see that it was clearly like a diesel like explosion. It would run people over in tank treads and shit. Like horrific shit. No, it was, I mean, it was just as bad, if not worse, as what the United States did in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So if that's any comparison, because people kind of, they don't teach a lot of Soviet history. So people don't really understand what the Soviets did to Afghanistan. And it is horrific.
What do you expect from a country like that? Like it's no different than what would you expect from America? Would you expect anything different? Like from the US government?
That's what Gaddafi said. It's like, your government is the biggest terrorist in the world.
Your government is a terrorist government. Reagan is the biggest terrorist in the world. You are far from the civilization.
I was waiting. I was listening. So I was going back and I was listening to news stuff, and I wanted to hear if anyone said that it was Gaddafi, like if they suspected it. But we had a pretty tight control on information back then, I guess. Like, people were very to the line on what was being reported. There was not a lot of theorizing going on. And that turned out to be a detriment too, because you know, it was clear that they were using it for nationalization after, and it was clear that there was gaps in intelligence and negligence going on.
In the days after September 11th, I think there was a genuine, authentic flag waving. I mean, you know, the flag and the patriotism. It became manipulated very quickly. It became overdone. It became false in many ways. It was used by politicians. It was a very difficult period in those months after September 11th for journalists who attempted to raise questions because they were immediately labeled by the government, which made very clear in those first days that it was going to play hardball with any journalist who raised tough questions. And you had an attorney general who went up on the Hill in Washington to Congress and said, those who criticize this administration are abetting terrorists.
You can't have government without negligence.
And that's kind of my thing is that all these governments are bad. Like, Gaddafi was bad. Gaddafi raped women, slaughtered people, tortured people to death, kept a dude in his freezer, kept a corpse in his freezer as a trophy. And like Omar founded the Taliban because they were sick of all the pedophiles in the country.
Yeah.
And then when they were so conservative that it was kind of if you're familiar with the French Revolution, the Great Terror.
France is isolated in the whole of Europe. It's being blockaded by Britain. It's being attacked and invaded by Austria and by Prussia. The people of Paris are seized by a fear that the victory of the counter-revolution will lead to a bloodbath.
Danton and Robespierre, the star orators of the National Convention, realized that only drastic new measures can save the revolution. They convinced their colleagues to institute a new form of martial law. It is time for all Frenchmen to enjoy sacred equality, announces Danton to the convention. It is time to impose this equality by signal acts of justice upon traitors and conspirators. Make terror the order of the day. It is the founding moment of the revolution's most infamous episode. The terror will come to symbolize Jacobin extremism and the corruption of revolutionary ideals. To meet the emergency, the new constitution and the rights it guarantees are suspended. Police spies scatter throughout the country. Anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activity is rounded up, quickly tried, and executed.
It's eventually get to the point where they banned TVs, but the Taliban, they made people hang their TVs like in nooses and stuff. They like strung up all the TVs in the country. It's real funny. Actually, Michael Moore has a great thing on it that I posted, and I was like, oh my god, this is like galactic cringe because it's already Michael Moore, but it's like it was like right before 9/11.
Then the final straw. No more television. That's right. No more TV. So I paid a little visit to the Taliban. The United Nations won't let them in, but they do have an office out in Queens, conveniently located between a liposuction clinic and a fast food joint.
Mr. Ambassador, we would like to give you a gift.
How could they say no to a van load of free TVs?
We'd like to present this to you. Give it to him? Okay, sorry, give it to you.
The ambassador wouldn't even touch it.
We'd like to present this gift to you. Okay, it's a television. It's got a remote control here. I'm Michael Moore, and you are?
How are you? Abdul Hakim Mujahid.
Do you watch TV when you're here in America? Do you ever watch TV?
Why not?
Why not? Yeah. As Americans, television is a basic right. It's like food, shelter, clothing, Baywatch. You know what I'm saying?
No.
U.S. representative.
Yeah, he wasn't allowed into the UN, but they still had an office here.
Well, you know.
So, I mean, technically Al-Qaeda did too.
Did they?
Kind of.
Well, just like a diplomatic.
Well, because when they took over MAK from Azim, Azim toured America at one point. Like while the jihad was going on in Afghanistan, he toured America and he, was trying to radicalize. So that's sowed the seeds for bin Laden to believe that 9/11 would have an Islamic uprising in our country.
The Al-Kifaq Refugee Center set up an elaborate support and recruiting network coast to coast with branches in more than 38 American cities. These centers became clearinghouses and recruiting offices to support jihad around the world.
Wouldn't that be a thing to see, huh?
Dude, it radicalized a lot of fucking people, though. He became a household name after that.
Yeah. I mean, the radicalization thing, can you stop it?
I think anyone can be de-radicalized. It's the thing, can you stop somebody from getting radicalized? No. I mean, I think it's part of your 20s. Like, you have to be radicalized or something. I think that it has a lot to do with, like, why people don't believe in 9/11, because they realize that they aren't safe and nobody can protect them. So I think a lot of
that fundamentally scares them.
Yeah, when you get to that stage where you kind of become an adult and you realize that mommy and daddy aren't like going to protect you from things.
Yeah.
And you realize that it's a lonely, cold world. I think it's natural for all people across the world to be very radical in their 20s, because you're coming out of that where you're adjusting to kind of an extreme change in your life because you're on your own. Everyone's searching for their purpose. Yeah.
It's very interesting.
There is a danger in America, a country that's very diverse and very open, of a kind of silent censorship. It's not anything official. It's not something that a government does, but there is a tendency to ostracize politically incorrect views. And I think for a few months after September 11th, it was considered politically incorrect to ask questions.
I do want to welcome
This changes when an FBI whistleblower steps forward and explains what the government knew and when they knew it. FBI agent Colleen Raleigh reveals to a speechless Congress that the Bureau and the CIA have been warning the government for an imminent attack. Bush dismisses it as gossip. But Washington does know. The CIA knew of al-Qaeda's network, the FBI of the flight training schools, and Bush was warned in August of possible attacks.